Good evening, everybody. Hopefully Aidan's with us. Just if you're there, put your
I'm
camera
here.
on.
I'm
Thank
here.
you.
I'm here.
Getting worried for a
Thought we'd
second.
lost you already.
Yeah. All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is our property investment in 2024 webinar. And I thought we'll just start by each introducing ourselves. So why don't you kick us off, Jess?
Hey everyone, my name is Jess, and for those of you that don't know me, I'm a local mortgage broker. I work for a local loan store, been in finance for about 7 years now. Previously, I worked in a bank, got lots of experience there across all different parts of finance, and found myself really passionate about helping people borrow money and set themselves up. And in particular, our local loan store, we really focus on helping customers borrow smarter and helping them set themselves up financially.
Thanks, Jess. So Pat Connolly from Bold Accounting, and we specialise in helping people make better decisions. So our thing is we want to give you all the information we can so that you can make big decisions to get ahead and pay less tax. And sometimes that means investing in property, which is why I'm pleased to be part of this panel tonight. Aidan?
I'm Aidan Collyer. My business is Collyer Property Investments. I specialise in helping my clients build their property portfolios. I've been a real estate agent for 11 years and have a really niche focus on new investment properties.
Cool, thank you. So before we go too much further, I've got to give you the disclaimer. You've heard neither one of us is a financial planner. So all advice provided in this webinar is general in nature, might not be appropriate for you. If you want personal advice, that's what this is all about. So feel free to reach out, but please don't take any advice in this webinar as being personal advice. So our agenda for today, we're going to start off by talking about who really pays for an investment property. And what I mean by that is it the ATO, is it the tenant, is it you? Looking at new versus old and my view on property deductions and the advantages and disadvantages of both. Jess is going to talk about how to improve your borrowing capacity. We're going to have a look at P&I versus interest only. And talk about leverage. And then Aidan's going to take us through the difference between a good investment and a dud. And the information he uses to predict growth and also giving us some tips at the end.
And can I also just say, guys, if you have any questions, send them through to the chat group and there'll be a section at the end there where we will hopefully be able to answer some questions that you've got.
Perfect. I was supposed to say that. Thanks, Jess.
That's all right, Pat. I'm covering for you as always.
So let's just dive right in. So we're going to do a comparison of a couple of different investment options to get a bit of an analysis of who's really paying for it and show you the power of some of this stuff. So let's consider a typical 3-bedroom house in a city suburb. You buy in a suburb next to where you live. You spend $900,000, typical 3-bedroom house in Sydney. Stamp duty is $35,000. We're going to use zero deposit, and Jess will explain a bit later why that might make sense in some case to use the equity in your home, which means you borrowed the full amount. So you got a loan of $935,000 and you've got a really good interest rate at 6.5%. So to break that down, let's have a look at what that means. For a 3-bedroom house in Sydney, you might get rent of $650 a week. And I've assumed in these numbers, it's going to be vacant 1 week of the year, which it may or may not be. Mortgage repayments on that $935,000 loan are going to be $60,000. And I've assumed, again, interest only. And again, we might talk about that later, so I won't go too about that now. And we've got holding costs. That's everything from your rates, your insurance, repairs and maintenance, agents' fees. So in total, you can see we've got a shortfall. We've got $33,000 of rental income and about $67,000 of expenses. So before we take into account tax considerations, we've got a loss of $34,000 a year and $660 a week. Then we're going to take into account depreciation, which is a tax deduction you get for the notional decline in value of the building. So when you buy an investment property, the land you hope increases in time, but the building obviously decreases in value over time as it gets older. And so you get to claim a proportion of the building cost over time as a deduction. So for a typical 3-bedroom house in Sydney, if it was built 80s, 90s, probably $4,500 is about right of what you could claim. It's going to be different in every property. So you've got, from a tax point of view on your tax return, you're going to put down $33,000 of rental income. You're going to put down $67,000 of rental expenses plus $4,600 of more rental expenses, which means you're going to have a tax loss of about $39,000. And if you're on a 39% tax bracket, so if you're an average income earner, so you're earning between 45 and 120,000, then you're going to get a tax benefit of $15,189. So it's going to give you a tax refund of that much when you lodge your return. So taking into account that tax refund, the actual after-tax cost is $19,000 a year or $368 a week to hold that property. So in this scenario, who's really paying? Because the property is costing you, as we said, $67,000 to hold. The tenant's paying $33,000 of it, so they're paying almost half. And then the ATO is actually paying $15,000 of it in the form of tax benefit back to you. So they're paying for 23% of your property, and you're only paying for 28% of the property in that situation, in that scenario. So you're able to take money, that 23% there is funds that you would otherwise have paid to the ATO that instead you've used to hold an investment property. Let's then look at a different scenario. Let's consider building a brand new 3-bedroom home in Perth. A little bit of a teaser of what Aidan might mention later. And in Perth, you're going to get a 5.5% rental yield. And I probably should stop and define rental yield. And that's what that means is if we look at the annual rental as a proportion of the purchase price, you're going to get about 5.5% of the property value in rent each year. In Perth, you're not going to get that in Sydney. So the purchase price might be $595. Stamp duty is on the land only. So you're not paying stamp duty on the whole property because you're going to build this property. Again, we're using zero deposit, so we're comparing apples with apples. Total loan amount of $600,035, same interest rate to keep that fair and consistent. You can see we're actually still going to get the same rental income. So at that higher rental yield, we still get the same income, even though the property is worth a lot less. The mortgage repayments on $600,000. Again, we've kept it interest only so we can compare. Our holding costs are a bit lower because we're not going to have any repairs and maintenance because we just built this property. Otherwise, it works the same way. The big kicker is the depreciation on the brand new property is more like $15,500. And there's two reasons for that. The first reason being that it's obviously been built brand new in modern times. So you're claiming the building cost in today's dollars. So it costs a lot more to build a property today than it did in 1980 or 1990. But secondly, on new properties, you're able to claim depreciation on fittings as well as the building. And when I say fittings, I mean carpets, blinds, bathroom fittings, kitchen fittings, anything that if you picked up the house and shook it would fall out. You're able to claim depreciation on a new property, but you can't on an existing property. And that can make a big difference. So in this scenario, we've got a pre-tax loss still of $11,500 or $369 a week. But once we take into account the depreciation and the tax loss, we actually get a tax benefit of $10,500. So it's only going to cost us $998 a year or $19 a week to hold that property. And as you can probably have deduced by now, when I show you this graph, the tenant's paying for the vast majority of this property because of the better rental yield. The ATO is paying for 24% through that big depreciation charge, and you're paying for 2% of that property. And so what I love about this strategy is that you're able to take money you're already paying to the ATO, and if you can find the right property, without putting much in at all, $20 a week, if you find the right property, you're able to avoid paying that to the ATO and use it to hold investment property instead, which is going to give you long-term wealth building. So Jess, I'll take it over to you now. Tell us how to improve that borrowing capacity so you might be able to do that.
Awesome. Thank you, Pat. So I don't know about you guys, but looking at those past slides, that makes me really excited to see the opportunities out there and what the actual cost is for you to hold a property. So a big question that obviously we get asked is, when you're starting to look at your investment journey, how much can I borrow? What's my budget, etc. And so I just want to go through a couple of things with borrowing capacity. So with borrowing capacity, I want you to think of it like this. Borrowing capacity is determined on money coming in, expenses, and liabilities going out, okay? So a lot of people come to us and they say, I've got a lot of equity in my owner-occupied home, or I've got a couple of investment properties and I've got equity in my home, so I should be able to borrow a lot more. But unfortunately, that is a myth. And if you think of it like this, your owner-occupied property might have $500,000 equity in it, which is fantastic and is absolutely usable to purchase more investment properties. But that $500,000 is that's not income coming into your account, and that is not then going to pay off the mortgage. Okay, so I want you guys to think of borrowing capacity, money coming in, expenses going out. So a big thing when we're looking at living expenses, a lot of people don't realize that it's based on your household situation. So for example, we take a couple earning say $200,000 and they've got 2 children. The government deemed the average living expense in that scenario to be about $4,000 a month. Now, lenders have to use that as a baseline. It's basically a benchmark. If I'm having a appointment with somebody and they've said that their living expenses, let's say a couple with 2 kids, their declared living expenses are $3,000 a month, unfortunately, lenders have to use that base minimum. Now, what they don't tell you is what sits outside of that base minimum are things like private health, life insurance, private education, tutoring, and things like that. Okay, strata costs, strata fees. So those expenses are actually categorized outside of that benchmark, and that's where that can eat into your borrowing capacity. Now, I'm not telling you to pull your children out of private schooling and put them in public. That is not what I'm saying here.
I am hearing lots more reasons that having 4 kids was a questionable decision, Jess.
Look, Pat, I also, I question your choices on that one. But in saying that, it is a great opportunity before you start speaking to a broker or whilst you're going through the process, great opportunity just to review your insurances, your health insurance, life insurance, and such like that, just to make sure that you are keeping those costs as relative to your scenario as possible. Okay, so that's one way that you can have a look to reduce your living expenses. The next is a home loan health check. So for a lot of the people that are with us tonight, you may already have an owner-occupied home or you've got an investment property. You might have gotten that home loan 10 years ago and you've not really looked at it since then, or you might have structured it a little bit differently at the time to suit your needs then, and things have changed now. And so I would encourage you all to reach out, do a home loan health checkup. It doesn't cost you anything, and just see, number one, are you on the best rate possible? Number two, are your loans structured correctly? Because restructuring debt and making sure that what is tax deductible is correctly allocated. That's one big part of it, making sure that your rate is correct, making sure that annual fees or monthly fees are as low as possible. That all makes a difference. Next is reducing personal liabilities, a personal favourite of mine. We often see couples come in and they might have a car loan or 2 car loans, personal loan, credit card debt, etc. One of the beauties with home loan lending is if you've got equity in your property, you can consolidate and restructure your debt. And you can actually say, for example, you've got a car loan, average car loan is about $50,000. And an average repayment on $50,000 is about anywhere between $1,000 and $1,200 a month over a 5-year loan term, which is about the average for a personal loan. Now, if you were to consolidate that into your home loan, you can have a separate loan as well. So you might have your existing owner-occupied loan, and you can have a split loan allocated for that personal debt. When you refinance that and you've consolidated it and linked it to your property, number one, the interest is going to be considerably less. Number two, you can allocate a higher loan term. Now, touching on, advice, and this is general advice in nature, but when you're having a longer loan term, you don't necessarily want to be paying that asset, that car, over 30 years. Okay, so I always recommend to my clients, continue making as high as a repayment as you can on those loans. Even if your loan term is 20 years or 30 years, you don't want to be paying off a car when the car's long gone. But by taking that loan term higher, your repayments will come down, and thus your borrowing capacity will improve dramatically. Okay, so that's another way that you can look to increase your borrowing capacity by restructuring your personal liabilities and debts. Another one is to consider properties with a higher rental return, and this is something Aidan is going to touch on later on in his piece. But one of the big things that I see is a lot of, especially young borrowers or first-time investors, get excited. Mum and dad have said, there's a great property in the suburb that you've grown up in, type of thing, and it's $900,000. You get $500 a week rent. Those numbers are really going to stack up against you when we're looking at borrowing capacity. Whereas if you look at what Aidan's going to present to you later, you'll see that the opportunities are much, much stronger, and borrowing capacity is going to improve dramatically. And lastly, rental income. Okay, now, unfortunately, lenders are a little bit conservative on the rental income side. So this is where a broker is really key, I think, for investors in particular. Lenders vary vastly. So some lenders will take 75% of your rental income and also factor in $200 to $300 a month of expenses to hold that property. Whereas some lenders will take up to 90% of that rental income and not include any expenses because they know they're already shading the 10% buffer to allow for any discrepancies or expenses there. So depending on what your situation is and depending how tight your borrowing capacity is, we can make sure to place you with a lender that's going to be most suitable to your scenario.
Sure. So now I'm going to talk about, and I'll let Jess do this, but I've got strong opinions on principal and interest, best interest only, and some of these are tax considerations, but I'll let Jess take you through first what the pros and cons are, and then I'll give you some general advice.
Awesome. Thanks, Pat. So when you're looking at structuring your home loan, structuring an investment loan, one of the things that we'll talk about is your product and what type of repayments you'd like. So 2 types of repayments, principal and interest or interest only. Principal and interest simply means that if you borrow 500,000, you're going to be making payments to pay back that 500,000 plus the interest that the bank is charging you. If you are paying interest only, you don't actually start paying that 500,000 off, you're just paying interest to hold that loan or to have that facility. Okay, at some point you do have to pay back the principal, so whether that is when you sell or when you refinance or whatever it is, but at some point you will have to pay back the principal. So pros and cons for principal and interest. Pros: when you're paying back principal, you're building equity in your property faster. Okay, so 2 ways you can build equity: 1, market growth; 2, paying down your debt. All right. Also, lower interest rate. Traditionally, interest-only loans sit at about a 0.2% higher interest rate. Okay, so nothing crazy high, but it is a little bit lower to have a principal and interest rate. Cons: your repayments are going to be higher. Okay, so even though the rate is lower, the repayment is going to be considerably more because you are paying back a chunk of that principal as well as the interest. And also it reduces your cash flow. So you can understand, if you've got a $500,000 loan and your mortgage repayments are $3,000 a month, principal and interest, if you've got an interest only loan, that repayment reduces down to about $1,800 a month. Well, you can see you've got yourself a little bit of a cash flow situation there, where you can then start using that cash towards either an owner-occupied property and paying down your owner-occupied home. We classify that as a bit of dead debt because there's no tax incentive to have that debt there, and it works against you in terms of negative gearing when we look at your borrowing capacity. So I would recommend either smashing down your owner-occupied home or saving that money up and purchasing another investment. Okay, and then interest only, I've kind of covered off a little bit already, but pros: that lower monthly repayment, which means better cash flow, which means you can free up funds for your next property, which is very exciting when you think about the growth that can happen in a 5-year period. And if you've been able to acquire a few properties simply by structuring your lending a little bit smarter and borrowing smarter, you can see where that can take you, which is really exciting. Cons: you don't start to build your equity on the side of paying down your debt. Okay, so the only equity you're going to get in your property is market growth. But if you work with Aidan, you're going to find that there's going to be lots of market growth in the areas that you're investing. At the end of the interest-only period, so let's say you take an interest-only period for 2 years. At the end of that, your loan will revert to principal and interest unless you request to extend your interest-only period, which most lenders will allow you to take up to a 10-year interest-only period and defer that principal payment. At the end of that deferral period, though, you will have to start paying back that principal. And generally speaking, that payment is going to be higher because you have to make up what you haven't already paid in that time period. Okay, now there are ways that you can structure this to get around it, such as refinancing. Okay, and there are a few different ways that you can look to work around that. So all in all, I think, like Pat said, quite passionate about the interest only option as a way to get ahead and certainly increase your borrowing capacity and overall position.
I guess to really break it down, the point being made is that it does depend on your circumstances, but if you've got any debt in your life that's not tax deductible, so the most common one is you've got a mortgage on your own home, it just doesn't make sense to start paying off a property that has a loan that's tax deductible instead of paying off that loan. So Jess, you helped me with a loan for an investment property a couple of years ago, and I asked for the longest interest only period I could possibly have, and Jess went and got that for me because I've still got a mortgage, and there's no way in hell I'm paying $1 of principal off my tax deductible investment debt while I've still got a mortgage. It just doesn't make sense. It's something I see that sometimes it's a harder concept to explain, but it can be quite frustrating as an accountant because you're looking at it and you think the overall level of debt is the same, but you're getting a poorer tax outcome just for which debt you decide to pay off first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which kind of segues well into the next point here, which I just wanted to touch on briefly, which is the power of leverage. So property is the only asset class where you can invest mostly with somebody else's money. So the bank will lend you up to and over 80% of the loan of the property's value for you to go and invest in a property. You can go up crazy amounts, probably just, I don't know what the highest you can go up to is, but you can go.
Give you anything you want.
Yeah, it's the only asset class where that's the case. Shares you can do margin loans sometimes, depending on your serviceability, but again, only up to 50%, never up to beyond that. So it's not always the best return when you're comparing percentage points. Over the long term, the share markets outperform the property market, but that ignores the fact that when you buy property, generally you've leveraged heavily and used someone else's money. And I'll show you in the next slide what I mean by that. So this is a table. I just stole this because I thought it already exists and I don't want to remake it. So I'll put your source at the bottom there. So what this is, we've got 4 investors, each with different levels of leverage. Investor A takes $100,000. They've all got $100,000 to invest. Investor A takes the $100,000, gets a 10% return. And so they've got a return of $10,000. They get a return of 10%. Investor B does the margin loan with shares. So they put 100,000 in, they borrow 100,000 from the bank, and they buy $200,000 worth of shares. The share market grows 10%, which means they earn 20%, because 10% of 200,000 is 20%. So on their $100,000 they had, they've earned 20,000. So they've actually got double the return by using leverage. Investor C goes and buys a property worth $500,000 with their 100,000 deposit, borrows 400,000, gets the 10% return, which equates to $50,000. And they've got a $50,000 return off an investment of $100,000 using leverage. Investor D pushes it even further. They go and borrow. They use the $100,000 as a 5% deposit on probably multiple properties. So they're holding $2 million worth of property with their $100,000. They get growth of 10%. They earn $200,000 off their $100,000 investment. So you can see this all works when markets are growing, which is why it's important to know where you're investing. But the power of leverage here is huge. If you earn $2 million worth of property, every time the property market goes up by 10%, you won lotto, basically. You've got an extra 200 grand. And that happens regularly. The Australian property market, capital cities, that happens almost every year. So it just goes to show this is why I'm passionate about property, and I'm not giving advice, and I do advise clients on all sorts of investments. But this is the only kind of investment where you can get the ATO to pay, if you can get the ATO to pay most of your holding costs and just sit there and collect all of the growth, it's quite a good strategy.
Quite powerful stuff.
Aidan, tell us what the 2024 property investor is looking for.
I've stayed quiet until now because I've got lots that I'd like to say. So hello again, everyone. So look, in 2024, 2 of the words that I think are really important to people that are considering going down the property investment path are sustainability and affordability. And everyone this year, last year, is talking about cost of living, cost. It's all about money. My own experience in building new properties for myself and also for a lot of clients over an 11-year real estate career has been that is a strategy that offers you both and more. So I think it's a strategy where you get to have your cake and eat it too. And if you're like me, I do enjoy cake. So the 2024 property investor is time poor, thinks they can't afford it, doesn't know where to buy or what to buy, worries about the potential cost and not the actual cost. And that is a biggie, knowing how to calculate the bottom line and what are the actual numbers you should be looking at, getting comfortable with debt. This is good debt, not bad debt, making debt your best friend. And Pat gave a great couple of examples earlier in our presentation.
Couldn't agree more.
And my personal favorite, listening to people that haven't done what they want to do. So I'm sorry to tell you, often it can be mum and dad or your grandparents or the old gentleman down the street that you see every day walking the dog that had one property 15 years ago. In my whole real estate career and my real estate life, I always have taken advice from people who are where I want to be and who are doing what I want to do. So it's really important that you have the right team behind you. If I can go to the next slide, please. So the first thing that I just want to touch on is some of the things that I look for in identifying a hot market. And then on the next slide, I'm going to give some case studies of where this very list right here has proved to work. So one of the first things I look at is where is the government spending their money? Put simply, infrastructure. A diverse economy. So we've all heard the horror stories of people who have bought in mining towns, promises of huge returns and then it's fallen flat. So we look at having areas where there's lots of things happening, not just one industry or area that you're reliant on. Population growth, that is all about supply and demand, basic economics. Where are the big developers buying? That's a key one for me, and that goes hand in hand with where is the government spending their money. I can almost guarantee you that no major developer is going to put tens or sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars into an area that they haven't done a hell of a lot of research and see a very bright future for. Vacancy rate's one of my favorite things to look at. If you look at the vacancy rate in an area, that is generally a good indicator of, can I get tenants and can I get tenants quickly, which is often, particularly for a first-time investor, that is their major concern. And am I going to get a good return? What are the rents in the area? What has the growth been like? And the great thing about being a property investor in 2024 is a simple Google search will give you those few answers. And also looking again at your bottom line and talking to your accountant. So I cannot give you any financial advice, but I think particularly if you're looking at buying and building an investment property, chat to your accountant, because it's so important that you know your bottom line and you know that what the benefits will look like for you. And it will only take Pat a couple of minutes to work your scenario from a tax point of view.
A few minutes, maybe. Yeah.
A few minutes.
Yeah.
So what you're looking at now is just a timeline of the last few years. So using the previous slide, markets that I've successfully identified, and I'm going to also use myself as a bit of a case study here. So in 2017 to 2019, Queensland was starting to simmer. As I like to say, it was there was a lot of excitement around Queensland. It hadn't done anything for a long time. I was working in traditional real estate and I was 22, wanted to buy my first investment property, and I was weighing up between a unit that I personally had on the market and buying a home and land package in an area called Springfield Lakes in southeast Queensland that someone who owned a lot of property had introduced me to. And not buying my own listing I had on the market was the best thing I ever did, which sounds strange for a real estate agent to say. But what I love about this property, and it's a great case study for new, is my in costs were about $425,000, house and land, stamp duty and legal fees took me to just under $430,000. But fast forward to the last valuation I had on that property, Easter last year, I had a property that was worth $650,000 to $680,000. But the best part was because I built a new property and I chose the right area at the right time. My mortgage repayments were $320 per week. Rent was $585 per week. And because I'd built a new property, I had created a scenario where I had a property that was positively geared in my pocket, but negatively geared as far as the tax man was concerned. And in my opinion, that is the dream scenario for an investor, because I'm making all the profit, someone else is paying for the cost. And I was only able to achieve that by, number one, going to the right area, and number two, building new. In 2019 to 2021, I was very active around Western Sydney and the Hawkesbury. I know a lot of you here tonight are local to that area, so you know areas like the Greater Penrith region, the Redbank Estate, at North Richmond, Box Hill, those sorts of areas. That was another big success story. Again, identifying the right market at the right time. But one of my big passion projects was around the time that COVID came into the world. Everyone was scared to buy. No one wanted to move. We identified the Hunter region and Central Coast, and that area was doing all of the things that Queensland was doing back when I bought there. And so at the end of 2020, I bought a block of land in an area called Gilliston Heights, and there, Maitland, Rutherford, Head, Greta, Thornton, those were all areas that myself and a lot of my clients targeted, because government was spending through the roof in their area. Developers were investing tens of millions of dollars. And that was a very exciting time. Fast forward 12 months, my block finally registered. I had paid $245,000 and I had a block that was valued at $480,000. And I chose to construct a duplex on that.
Can I just say on that, Aidan,
Sure.
sorry, can I just say, if you think about the power in that, you've held a property, it's not really cost you anything because the land hasn't registered, which means that the bank won't settle on a property that's not registered. Okay, so in that time, while you're waiting for the land to register, you've increased the property value by more than what you could ever save. So there's real power in that. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, to demonstrate that calculation, if you don't mind, what was the deposit on that land? Was it just the 10%? While you're waiting?
10%, yes.
Yeah, so you put
5%, sorry, 5%.
5%. So you put down $13,000, and by the time it settled, you made 200 grand. Yeah.
And that's the power of, I guess,
That's
finding somewhere that is, the leverage, exactly.
Yeah.
And it gets better. So then I constructed a duplex. My total loan ended up being just under the $800,000 mark. But again, right area, right time, building new, choosing the right product on the right block in the right area. Each side of that duplex now is worth sort of 620 to 660 in today's market. So all up, land and build was about $500,000 uplift, and that was I only tell you that story, number one, I think it's important people know that I practice what I preach, but we achieved that as well for so many clients, and a duplex is just one example of how you can produce that equity, and part of it was, you know, the market really boomed, but there's still great opportunities in that area today. I'm still very active in the Hunter and Central Coast. But if we can go to the next slide, 2022 to today has been a very exciting hot market. My favorite top pick right now, which is Western Australia. So again, WA is right now doing all of the exciting things that the Hunter and Queensland did at those times. So if you're seeing on the slide right now, some location shots from my recent visit, a lot of the areas that I'm favouring in WA are coastal. You can see on the bottom left, one of the aerial shots of one of the estates that I'm working in right this very minute. On the bottom right, me inspecting one of my clients' builds, pretending to be an influencer. And so WA has been a really exciting market to work in. Last year alone, we had 15.2% growth over there. So far this year, we've had 1.6%. That's according to CoreLogic. I anticipate next week when the stats come out for February, that will be closer to 3 or 4% so far for the year, compared to a New South Wales average of 0.4. Those numbers are important because I talk a lot about time is property's best friend. And I was talking with a client earlier today who was going to do something at the beginning of last year, looking at an average almost 20% growth combined in that time. That client couldn't have saved, and most people cannot save 20% of a $620,000 purchase price for a 4-bedroom home, but the market can do that for you. And so you'll hear me say a lot that time is property's best friend, and those numbers are a testament to that. What else do I love about WA? Vacancy rates keep falling. Most of my clients from handover are obtaining tenants within a week max. Rents are increasing. There is a lack of supply. I read something the other day that said WA needs 22,000 homes in the next 6 months. They're not going to build that many homes. So now is a great time to be investing because basic economics, supply and demand. Land is still ridiculously cheap. So most of the blocks in WA are under $250,000, which means you're going to make those great stamp duty savings as well. Most of my clients are paying between $4,000 and $6,000 stamp duty, which means your in costs are very low. And the other thing, as you can see in the photos, WA has not had a lot of the problems with wet weather that I experienced with my New South Wales build. Lucky me. wet weather days. So La Nina and all of the wet weather cycles that we've had on this side of the country, they haven't been experiencing over there. So your build times are generally quite a bit quicker.
Mm.
So just another summary, how can building improve your bottom line? Stamp duty, we've talked about that quite a bit. New properties do generally command a premium rent. There is a really strong demand for new and modern housing, dual income properties.
Before you move on, sorry, from that first point, I know we've spoken about stamp duty a lot, but I think it's worth maybe spelling it out a little bit, because one of the factors you'll be weighing up if you decide to build new is that for that construction period, that 6 to 8 months, you'll be without rent. If you bought an existing property, straight away you'd have rent. So I guess what you've got to look at in that is that if you're saving, 25, 30 grand on stamp duty, that's probably in most cases going to outweigh the rent that you could have had if you bought an existing property. So it's something to, and you might be also have been borrowing the stamp duty as well. So it's going to be not just the stamp duty, but also the interest on it forever. So I think it's something that it's easy sort of brush aside, but it actually can be quite a significant saving. So depending on your circumstances, that might be quite important to you.
And one of the other things is, sorry, you go, ladies first.
Thank you. So I think, especially to what Pat just said, if you are looking at using equity from an existing property, that means that you're actually, cashing in that equity for money to then go and spend that money on another property. You have to pay that money back to the bank. Okay, which a lot of people don't realize that's how equity works. Now, if you're borrowing, say, a 10% deposit or cashing in your equity for a 10% deposit on a property, you also need to cover your costs, which is going to be stamp duty, lender's mortgage insurance if you have less than a 20% deposit, which is another topic in itself. But if you're paying back that 10% deposit and stamp duty over a 30-year loan term, that's where these numbers really start to look more and more attractive, where you're paying less stamp duty and you're repaying that over a 30-year loan term. The less amount is much better, obviously.
And one of the things I like to get my clients to do is, especially if they've built properties with us before, is it around year 3 or 4, go and sit down with your accountant and look at your stamp duty savings, the higher rent that you've gotten, the extra depreciation you've gotten that you wouldn't have got if you bought established, and look at the first 3 years, look at your bottom line and compare that to the property that you were looking at purchasing, or potentially an older established property you might already own as an investment. And I can almost guarantee that every time your bottom line will be more improved. So building, it's a longer process to get there. But from an investment and a financial perspective, and this has certainly been my own experience, my bottom line looks significantly better, and it was well and truly worth the wait. The next point that I had there, dual income dwellings. So you heard me speak before about duplexes. I also love a dual key property. If I go back to Western Australia, you cannot buy a dual key property there. When I started working there, it was not something that was done. We worked with our builders to get them happening. And I did a lot of them in the Hunter and Western Sydney and the Hawkesbury. A dual key property is essentially a house with an attached granny flat. Just put one together last week for a client for $718,000, expecting rents of about $950 to $1,000 per week in WA. So the two income streams significantly improve your cash flow. I'm still a huge fan of your four-bedroom beautiful properties like the one in that photo there that one of my builders did near the coast. They're still getting great returns, putting them together in the high 5s and low 6s, and rents creeping up towards $700 per week.
Can I just say as well, on that dual income dwelling, to talk from a personal experience, my first exposure to investing was with Aidan, where purchased a block of land and built a dual income dwelling on it. I think the total cost was about $530,000. It's now worth about 880 all up, and we subdivided that so it's 2 separate properties that we can sell individually, and so we've had massive growth on that, but also the rent on that is just under $1,000 in total, and it cost us 530,000, and that included the deposit and the stamp duty. Because we didn't have a deposit, we used a guarantor, which is another way to purchase property. So I think there's power in that, absolutely, because on quite low incomes at that time, we were able to buy a property with dual income, which then allowed us to purchase another 3 properties within a 2-year period, because we were able to leverage that income and the equity growth of that property, which then allowed us to borrow for the next one, and so forth. So just a testimonial on that particular, quite passionate about that particular option.
Thank you. And so yeah, love a dual income property. Depreciation we've spoken about. Repairs is another big one. So in 11 years in real estate, I've seen so many times where people come in and say, I'm going to buy a fixer upper, and it ends up just being a endless money pit. It's not the house flipping scenario that they saw on UK TV or whatever channel they were watching it on. It never really turns out that way unless you are really, really experienced. So, when you build a new property, it's very, very likely that you'll have little to no repairs for the last few years, maybe a light globe or a door handle, and many of your major fixtures and fittings are going to be under warranty. Equity gains, as per our discussion a few minutes ago with products like duplexes. Rebates. I love negotiating rebates for my clients. So to give you an idea, a rebate is essentially a cashback. Lots of land developers offer them if you meet all the estate covenants and guidelines. Red Bank at North Richmond was doing that some time ago. And build rebates is something I always try and negotiate for my clients. Builders aren't always doing them, but to give you an idea, I just put one together for a client in WA the other day. They got a $4,500 rebate, which almost covered their stamp duty, which is great. It's extra money that you're getting that you wouldn't have had. And certain times of the year, builders can be quite generous with rebates as well. Full turnkey properties with nothing left to do. So that's a big question that I get a lot. When you build a new property, there really is nothing left for you to do. We negotiate for our clients landscaping, site works, the price that is in your contract is absolutely every dollar that you have to spend on that property, right down to your letterbox, with no additional costs for you. So you can really have confidence that the number that you're looking at is your number from an investment point of view that you can work off. And when it comes to tenants as well, we're partnered with a national property management agency, so we'll help you get tenants, help you get your depreciation schedule. Other than your loan, we really do provide a full one-stop shop. And my last point there is that building new often increases your borrowing capacity, and that was Jess and Pat just touched on that.
Okay, sorry, finding the controls, got it.
And I just want to finish with sort of my favorite property quote. So if I can leave you with anything, it's that time is property's best friend. So don't wait to buy property and wait. And I think we've all heard the stories in our lifetime of mum and dad or grandparents, whoever it might be, saying 20 or 30 years ago they wish they bought 10 because they were cheaper. And if we look at what history has shown us, it's that time is on your side once you're in the market, but the longer you wait, the more it's going to cost. And so I really implore people to, if you are in a position and it's free to get your borrowing capacity checked with a broker like Jess, look at doing something, because what property has done for me just in my 20s and for countless clients as well, really is not that hard. This is a very simple, easy strategy. We pretty well provide everything that you need to do. You just need to be able to get the loan, essentially. But I really want to plant that seed in people's mind that time is property's best friend.
Thanks,
And
Aidan.
can I just say on that as well, don't be afraid or think, oh, I've missed the boat, because where one door is closing, or where maybe it's not so advantageous to purchase, say, for example, in Queensland anymore, there's always a new hot and coming market, like Aidan's identified, WA. And if you do leave it another 12 months and then WA isn't quite as affordable anymore because it's boomed, there will be another area. So don't discount yourself ever in the market, because there's always going to be an up and coming spot.
Well, there's certainly no point waiting for it to get cheaper.
No.
Yes.
All right, so that's kind of the end of our program there. We've got some questions. I've had a couple come through. I don't know if you guys can Aidan and Jess, can you see them, or are they private messaged?
I think
I
they're
can't
private
see
message.
them, so
Okay.
they might have just come
Well,
to you.
yeah, I've got a couple. If anyone had any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or message me. First question I've got here is, what's the biggest mistake you've seen in property investment? Seen somebody who wants to take that.
I'll speak to that one. I would just say overall inaction, which is what I was just talking about. I speak to so many people who are in a position to do something, but for whatever reason, they just don't. And it's generally people's biggest regret is not getting into the market and taking advice from the wrong people, as I said in my first slide. You know, with any type of investment, I think, you know, I know nothing about shares. I talk to other people about shares, but I know a lot about property. So, you know, talk to and learn from people that are doing what you want to do.
I would say, in my experience, people don't know what they don't know, and a lot of the time what we're being fed or information that we're hearing is from our family and friends that have, you know, purchased somewhere local or what have you. And one of my biggest pain points is when I see, especially young investors or first-time investors, that first property is really, really key for the success of your portfolio. Because if you're buying a heavily negatively geared property, you're basically putting a ceiling on your head from day one. You know, based in the Penrith Hawkesbury area, an average home out here is probably $1 million, 1.1. You know, rental return, you're looking at probably 550 to 650. Okay. And when you think about those numbers, and from a loan perspective, what that's doing for them being able to purchase the next property and the next, because remember, those properties, they might increase in value, but that's not what pays the mortgage. And so that means equity means nothing in terms of borrowing capacity if your strategy is to purchase as many properties as possible to set yourself up. So that would be, from my perspective, one of the biggest pain points there.
I'll probably come at it a different way and say, to me, the biggest mistake is not being clear on your objective. Or mixing different objectives. So I often see someone come in and say, you know, I bought a property in Nowra because that's where I want to retire. So I'll rent it out till I'm ready to retire, and that might be 10 or 15 years away. And
Yes.
it's when you
It's
when
an
you're
emotional decision, not
Exactly.
a financial decision.
Yeah,
and it
or I
shouldn't
buy
be.
the house next door because it happened to come up for sale and I could afford it. You know, and that way I can keep an eye on it and be emotionally invested in it forever. It's when you're not really clear on what the purpose of investing is. It's fine to buy a property down the coast to retire if that's what you want to do, but that's unlikely unless you get a happy coincidence to be the property that's the best investment for you. So being really clear when you're buying a property, what is it you're actually buying it for, and then probably staying true to your objective would be something I'd recommend. Yeah,
I think that's a great point. And on that, like I see that quite a bit. I would say, to Pat's point, you know, you could probably purchase 2 to 3 really strong investment properties, and then by the time you're wanting to retire, sell them. If you've invested in the right areas, you've made hopefully money to then go and buy, you know, with cash, your retirement home. So, you know, to talk to that scenario, which we do see a fair bit, wanting to downsize on the coast and live that luxury lifestyle, you know, that would be my advice on that.
Next question is, I'm not sure who this is for. Do you charge a fee? Well, yes, I'm an accountant. I love fees. But maybe it's directed to you guys.
So as a broker, we don't charge a fee. Our service is free, and the process can be quite intense. So it absolutely doesn't cost anything to reach out and get a home loan health checkup. Doesn't cost anything to get your borrowing capacity checked. We do obviously get paid, and that is all disclosed in our documents to you. We get paid by the bank. I will just say, one of the a misconception out there is that brokers will charge a higher interest rate because we do get paid by the bank, and that is simply not true. If you come to us, we will actually negotiate a better rate for you, and that's simply just leverage because we submit, so many more deals. But if you came to us and I said CBA is the way to go, and you walked into CBA to then do the loan with the bank, the rate would more than likely be actually higher than what we've been able to negotiate down for you. So there's absolutely no downside to using a broker. It doesn't cost you a thing.
And I'll throw in my 10 cents, and much in the way that Jess gets paid by the bank, I get paid by the builders that I work with. I'm not a buyer's agent, so I don't charge clients an upfront fee or a percentage of your sales price. We receive a commission from the builders that we work with. And again, as Jess was saying, what we negotiate is generally better value than what people get on the open market. It includes absolutely everything for a full turnkey property, site works, landscaping, everything that you would possibly need, right down to depreciation schedules and all the rest.
Yeah, cool. We've got a question here. Is it better to smash down an owner-occupied loan in under 10 years or buy an investment property and capitalize on tax perks and capital gains? So I might take that, but I'm first of all going to say, refer you back to our disclaimer at the start. We're not giving any personal financial advice, and it obviously is impossible to answer that question without knowing your situation. My personal opinion, my way of answering that in a general term would be, I don't see that as an either-or scenario. I think that a really good strategy, if paying off your home loan is something that's really important to you, like it is to a lot of people, you can keep putting your $50 extra a week in, and you can knock, a couple of years off your 30-year loan, and you should do that if you can, if that's your objective. But as you've seen in some of the numbers we've shown tonight, if you can put $50 a week off, put your extra $50 a week off your mortgage, but also come up with an extra $20 to $100 to hold an investment property that over the next 10 years might be worth double what you pay for it, that's probably going to have a much bigger impact on paying off your own occupied debt than just trying to pay it off faster. I guess when you're paying it off faster, you're saving the mortgage interest rate. So you're paying it down and you're earning 5, 6, 7%, whatever your rate is. That's what you're earning. It's capped at that rate. When you're investing in property, you're potentially earning a lot more, a lot higher rate, and with the benefit of leverage, like we discussed. So, yeah, I don't know if either of you want to chime in, but
I might just add to that. During, say, when I was very active in the Hunter, I still am, but when rates were cheaper, we put together dual key properties for clients in the Hunter for under $650,000 that are returning over $1,000 a week now. They're very positively geared properties, and with time most properties can, as my Queensland property did, become positively geared. What a lot of my clients do is they take that extra money they're earning from their investments, whether it's from week to week on the rent or extra money they're getting back at tax time from the depreciation, and they use those investments as a vehicle, that extra income that they have coming in, they smash that off what I would call is bad debt, like your owner-occupied home, good debt and bad debt. So I think that concept is called debt recycling. I'll leave that to the financial planners to talk about, but that's what a lot of my clients have done. And when I talk about the equity gain on the duplexes as well, a lot of clients will sell their duplex and pay that huge chunk when they've bought at the right time off their own homes. I've had clients that have done a couple of duplexes at the right time and come out with a couple of $100,000 each time, smash it off their own home.
I would say to that, I think there's a balance between both, and I think that by prioritizing your owner-occupied home, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I would challenge the thinking that you've cost yourself 10 years in the market where you could have had equity growth of a couple $100,000 where you're not able to save that money. So I think there is a fine line between both, and I think a strategy session with either myself, Pat, or Aidan would be valuable. just to understand kind of what that fine line is where you can pay off your owner occupied home in a much faster rate, finding the right type of property to be able to still have growth and produce a positively geared property to continue paying off your owner occupied home whilst not losing time in the market for an investment. I think that's the key there.
Cool. All right, now this one I think is for Aidan. So the question is, for house and land packages, from the point of deciding to proceed, what is typically the time frame to lock in from a contract perspective, excluding finance? So not sure exactly what the question is. So do you want to just step us through the timeline of from when you meet a client to when they're getting the keys to their property?
Yep. So look, once I'll work off WA because that's my hot market right now. So if a client came to me with pre-approval or they knew what they're in a position to do, I would put some options together within a day or two generally, and we could have contracts signed within 1 to 2 weeks. On your block of land would be even quicker. Most of the builders produce contracts within a fortnight. There's one particular builder that does a lot of the working drawings and stuff up front, and they take about 6 weeks to prepare the contract. But you know, within a week of you deciding that you're wanting to do something, we can have pricing plans and all of that locked in, ready to go. And from when you settle on your block of land, we pretty well WA, your average build time is about 10 months at the moment.
Cool. Thank you. And final question is, who should we talk to first? Well, I would say there's not really one answer to that. I think it really depends where you are in your journey. I think probably if you're not sure if this is something you could do, probably I would say call Jess and see what your borrowing capacity is. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, here. If you know what you can borrow and you want to know if it makes sense for you to do it, that's when you'd ask me, and we can run through some numbers and look at what you could save.
Yeah.
And if you want to do it and you think it makes sense, but you're not sure about property and the strategy in general, that's when you might reach out to Aidan.
I'm probably the last piece of the puzzle. We saved the best till last, I like to think.
Debatable.
But because my first question to you is going to be, do you know how much you can borrow? But it's not uncommon for me to, I'm still happy to meet with clients, plant the seed about different areas that I'm working in and talk to them about what the possibility. And, Jess will ring me and say, I need the expected rent return and in costs to calculate how much this client can borrow, because again, the bank is going to, with an investment loan, factor in the expected rent return.
All right, and we've got another question now. Is it possible, this one's for you, Jess, is it possible to cross-collateral home loans that are interest only, or do we need the equity before we can cross-collateralize?
Okay, that's a great question. So if you are interest only and you've invested in the right area, hopefully you have equity in the property that has increased the value of your property. And so cross-collateralization is absolutely definitely an option. It really just depends on how much equity. So if you've built up a 5% equity, for example, not enough to cross-collateralize. And that's not to say because it's interest only either. So if you like to start actually making a dent in the principal, you start to see that bell curve at around that 15-year mark where you start to see the principal really come off. So if you've been interest only for a couple of years, and if that's your current structure, for example, don't be kicking yourself thinking you've done yourself a disservice. Not at all. It's really that first couple of years you're going to see the growth more in the property market and the growth of the area. So, but yes, cross-collateralization absolutely is an option, and it's one of the, when I'm speaking to clients about their deposit and how they're actually going to fund or contribute to the next property, cross-collateralization is one of the 3 options that I run through with my clients and break down each option and see which one is going to work best for them.
So just to spell that out, maybe a bit more for the ones that people are smart mortgage brokers. What we're saying, Jess, I think is, if you bought a property that cost you $600,000, it's been interest only the whole time, but now it's worth $1 million. Yeah. You've now got $400,000 of usable equity, which is 40% of the property's value, and potentially got a couple $100,000 you could use for cross-collateralizing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, even though you've never paid anything off the property.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to launch the poll now. So I really appreciate everyone's attendance, and I'd love it if you can hang around for 2 seconds to launch this poll. If there's to go through this poll if there's no more questions. So hopefully that's popping up on your screens now.
I'm giving myself 5 stars.
Yeah, I'm going to see how it works. Answer all my questions. 5 stars. Just make sure this is all working. All right. No worries. Well, thank you so much, everybody. If there's no further questions, we're all happy to talk to you anytime. Also, really would appreciate you have a look at our socials if they're valuable. Follow us. We
Yeah,
try and
absolutely.
share tips all the time, and it's a good way to keep up what's happening, especially with Aidan and what he's working on. So, yeah, feel free to come find us on Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah,
any
absolutely,
questions?
guys.
Yeah, reach
Thank
out.
you so much for your time and joining us. We'd love to chat to you afterwards. If you do want to reach out to any of us, feel free. Yeah, good luck with your property investing journey. We hope you found value in tonight.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
See you, everyone.